Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Now let's take a look at the IRS and the NSA. They're now being used as open political weapons. We've known this for a while. We saw the way the IRS was coming after the Tea Party groups, for example, doing it openly, doing things that Nixon was impeached for, and yet nothing happened. And today we had some interesting developments on that, but let's take a look first at the NSA. Yesterday we had James Clapper going on CNN, and now they are hailing him as a savior of democracy. You have this op-ed piece from CNN saying, James Clapper, defending democracy from Trump. And who is this written by? Well, this is written by Juliette Kayyem. She's CNN's national security analyst. She wrote a book, Security Mom, an unclassified guide to protecting our homeland and your home. Okay, so, and she used to be an assistant secretary for Homeland Security under Obama. So no political agenda there, no apologist for the police state, for the surveillance state. But she paints James Clapper as this reluctant warrior who retired. You know, he was fighting for truth, justice, and the American way, but he reluctantly came back. Really, this guy is the lying political hack who is prying into our lives and trying to overthrow our democracy. And he talks about how Trump is trying to overthrow our democracy. This is what she said last week when he testified before the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. James Clapper, former director of national intelligence, had the disposition of someone who looked like he'd retired for a reason and planned to go straight back. He made his points answered by many and perhaps hoped that this would be the end of his contribution to the Trump-Russia story, but he just had to come back. And so what did he say? Let's listen to this back and forth first, and let's put this in context. Let's remember who James Clapper is. Remember that this is a guy who was asked by Senator Ron Wyden whether or not the NSA and other intelligence services were spying without warrants on the American people. And this is what he said at the time.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Yeah, that guy is the worst liar ever. And the worst poker player
perhaps.
Ever, too. He says, no, sir, no, sir. He can't even look him in the eye when he says that lie. And interestingly enough, I've seen Michael Hayden talk about this and just heap scorn, not on James Clapper for spying unconstitutionally on Americans and breaking the law, not on James Clapper for lying to the American people, and it came back and bit him really big with the Ed Snowden releases, which happened about a month or so after that. But Michael Hayden, who was the former director of the NSA, director of the CIA, came back and said, shame on Ron Wyden. He and all the senators there knew that James Clapper was spying on everybody. He shouldn't have asked him that question. He shouldn't have put him on the spot and had him lie before the Senate. That's the mentality. When somebody breaks the law in Washington, they get angry with the person who exposes it, not with the person who breaks the law. Now he comes on with Jake Tapper, and this is what Clapper told Tapper yesterday.
I think in many ways our institutions are under assault, both externally, and that's the big news here is the Russian interference in our election system. And I think as well our institutions are under assault internally.
Yeah, they're being attacked internally. And so Tapper says, internally? How? From the president? And he says, exactly. And then Tapper says, because he's firing the checks and balances, firing the checks and balances. No, he's not firing the checks and balances. He fired somebody who worked for him in the executive branch. Clapper, though, comes back and says, well, I think you know, the founding fathers had a system of 3 co-equal branches of government and a built-in system of checks and balances, and I feel as though that is under assault and that is being eroded. Actually, the Department of Justice, as well as the NSA, the CIA, those organizations are under the executive branch. This is not a checks and balances issue. And actually what these people believe is that there really has been a coup against the permanently entrenched, unelected, unaccountable, unconstitutional actions of this bureaucracy that thinks that nobody can take them out of office. That's one of the reasons why I was very happy to see this done. But what is being forgotten, and we see the quotes from the people who are attacking Trump, like last week we saw Jeffrey Toobin, who went on with Don Lemon. They talked a great deal about Jeffrey Toobin's comments. He said, this action will disgrace Trump's memory for as long as the presidency is remembered. You know, apocryphal things like that, talking about Nixon's Tuesday night massacre and so forth. But on the same program, we had Harvard lawyer Alan Dershowitz, and he disagreed with him. He said, should Comey be the director of the FBI? The answer to that is no. He said he had called earlier for Comey to resign. He said he lost his credibility. A lot of this is his fault. Then he goes on to ask, the second question is, should it be the president of the United States who makes the decision to fire him? Well, not while he's under an investigation, but it is the president's choice to fire him if he wishes, because the FBI is in the under the executive branch, under the Department of Justice. And he goes on to say, we need to take a look at who he appoints next, and we will take a look at that. But of course, that is the issue. Can you fire a guy who acts like J. Edgar Hoover, that puts everybody under investigation? You know, let's remember J. Edgar Hoover. Remember, he was the guy that Nixon said, we have on our hands here a man who will pull down the temple with him, including me. We had Harry Truman, who said, we want no Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is trending in that direction under J. Edgar Hoover. They're dabbling in the sex life scandals and in plain blackmail. Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him. Did he create the NSA? Did Harry Truman create the NSA by executive order as a check against this kind of abuse of power by J. Edgar Hoover? You know, back in September, Politico, he was the public enemy number one, Comey was, of the left, of the Democrats. And back in September, Politico, who hated Trump, wrote The Case Against James Comey, a very lengthy article. The subtitle was, Not Since Hoover Has an FBI Director Shown Such a Lack of Accountability. But now this guy is the hero of the left because they believe that they can use him to get Trump somehow. And this is what they said at the time. They said, with hard, hooded eyes, a pugilistic bearing, J. Edgar Hoover's official portrait glowers, face fixed in a bulldog scowl, down the hallways of the FBI's Washington headquarters. Even the building itself, a crumbling, brutalist cathedral, seems to evoke something of the man, its namesake, who scared 8 presidents from Coolidge to Nixon. And then he says the FBI's history is divided into 2 distinct epochs. There was Hoover and there was post-Hoover. And he said after Hoover's death in office, this is a guy who was in office for life. After he left, people took a different path until Comey. And he says there's a growing consensus, he wrote this in September, that Comey has wielded the powers of the directorship more aggressively than anyone since Hoover, to the consternation, even the anger of some of his employees. He says, among dozens of current and former Justice Department officials, this realization has given way to a rising sense of alarm that our next president will find Comey just as untouchable as Hoover once was, and perhaps nearly as troublesome. And then they had a quote from a former U.S. Attorney, Special Assistant, Watergate prosecutor, Nick Ackerman. He said, Comey is totally acting inappropriately. There is no question about that. Well, that was then. That was back in September. But now it is the end of democracy, according to those who are spying on us, who are involved in political surveillance. And on Saturday, we had Rand Paul renew calls again for the government to look into the use of the surveillance state for political purposes. He said another senator told him that he was being surveilled by the Obama administration as well. Somebody told that to Rand Paul. He said another senator has told me that as well. He says if Americans are having their government spied on by the opposition party, that would be enormous. That would be far more dangerous than anything we've seen from Russia. And he goes on to say, we're going to try to get to the bottom of this. And it's a very secret world. This is Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul. So we're going to try to get to the bottom of this. But you have to realize, he said, that it is a world so secret, most members of Congress are never allowed. We were talking about Rand Paul and his concern that the Obama administration was spying on political opposition and using the apparatus of the massive surveillance state that we've created in this country. Remember, Watergate, many times people have said it was nothing but a third-rate burglary. This, however, would be a very sophisticated surveillance using the tools of government against political enemies. So Rand Paul says, so when this all comes out, if there are political figures from the opposition party involved in this, being spied on by the Obama administration, it's a story bigger than any of the allegations with regard to Russian collusion. And he's absolutely right. And yet, when we look at the possible people who might be replacing James Comey, the person who keeps coming up to the top is ex-Congressman Mike Rogers. He's now been interviewed for this position at the FBI director. And I say that this is a very concerning situation. This person, in my opinion, is totally unqualified to be put into this position, just as we talked about in the last segment. J. Edgar Hoover and the way he used the FBI as his own personal espionage agency. And of course, we know how he spied on Martin Luther King and others, but he spied on all the presidents. He got dirt on all the congressmen and senators and presidents and used that to stay in power, just as we saw James Comey saying, I'm investigating you and I'm investigating you, so you can't fire me because you're under investigation. If you fire me while you're under investigation, now you're guilty of something, just from having those types of allegations. Who is Mike Rogers? Mike Rogers is someone who pushed tirelessly until he got it through, pushed CISPA. It finally went through as CISA. But it was an effort to allow the government to do dragnet surveillance on people, to not push that back, to allow corporations to turn over that information without you, the public, being able to come back at those corporations. They took out the P, but it is all about protecting their corporate partners in espionage, protecting them from being sued by the people that they are spying on, the people whose information they're gathering and collecting for commercial purposes to sell you mouthwash or whatever, but then they turn it over to the government. He pushed a long time. He finally got that through. They did SOPA, ACTA, PIPA, CISPA a couple of times, finally got CISA through. Then he retired. This is a guy who also said about the NSA surveillance, he said, hey, if you don't know they're violating your privacy, they're not violating your privacy. That's the mindset of this guy. We do not want someone like that in the office of the FBI director. Nevertheless, he was endorsed over the weekend by the FBI Agents Association. He had 7 terms in Congress, so this is something that is very worrying.
This is one of the biggest secrets out there. The missing link of why our ancestors, whether you were in Africa or ancient Albion, which is England today, why our ancestors were so much stronger. I mean, there are huge archaeological reports, all sorts of anthropology studies, you can look them up for yourself, that show that humans, just an average farmer of 10,000 years ago in England, was stronger than Olympic athletes today. In the final equation, everyone knows our modern society has lost its vitality. The sperm counts are down like 90%. People are falling apart. They're totally depressed. They're unhappy. What is going on? Every ancient culture was obsessed with what I'm about to reveal to you. Today we call it bone broth, and for thousands of years our ancestors enjoyed its benefits before it became lost to our modern diets of processed junk. That's why I'm so excited to announce the product that is undoubtedly the jewel in the crown of Infowars Life products. Caveman. We lost our vitality because we just ignored the ancient traditions. Everyone knew that you used all the parts of the animal. You used the skin to cover yourself or for shelter. You used the meat for sustenance, the fat for cooking, but you used the bones for strength. We are now introducing Caveman by InfoWarsLife.com, the ultimate in true paleo nutrition with bone broth, turmeric root, chaga mushroom, and 7 total primal superfoods in a single great tasting formula. The bone is so amazing. From the outside structure full of minerals and key cofactors to the marrow that produces the blood for the body. This is the engine of the life essence. I've made a lot of important points here, but this is the one you need to research for yourself because it's so key. High-quality bone broth helps support healthy muscles and connective tissue, while the active compounds in turmeric do battle on the cellular level and help fight free radicals. And collagen is essential to aid healthy tendons, ligaments, and muscle tissue. This is an absolute win-win. You get an amazing product produced right here in America. You support Infowars and all we're doing to promote freedom and the restoration of our republic and promotion of freedom worldwide. The journey towards better health and giving our bodies these amazing compounds that God created starts at InfoWarsLife.com. 3 years in the making, incredible research, and the very best ingredients. I'm Alex Jones, and I may not be a caveman, but compared to these trendies out there in the street, I'm as close as it gets. Join me at InfoWarsLife.com and get your caveman formula today.